In this video, I want to give a rundown of gaming history. So 3, 2, 1. Ralph Baer wanted to bring an interactive television to life. Back in the 1960s, TVs were only used for passive viewing, but he imagined a way to play games on them. He pitched the idea, developed prototypes with his team like the Brown Box, and eventually partnered with Magnavox to mass produce the Odyssey. Then the Fairchild F predated the 2600, becoming the first console to have interchangeable cartridges, but had many limits. So the following year, Atari brought the 2600 to the table. It had color graphics, sound, joysticks, and games like Space Invaders, Pong, and Centipede. It was going smooth until the 80s because there's no filter for bad games, so slot games like Custer's Revenge made it through. And then the worldwide worst game, E.T., caused the entire video game market to crash in 1983. Then Nintendo made a worldwide phenomenon out of spite, the NES, in 85. It was revolutionary and brought true 8-bit to the scene. It was in some of the most revolutionary games of all time, with Zelda and Super Mario Bros. And around this time, Sega tried to compete with Nintendo with their Master System. It failed in the US, but it was a big success in Europe and in Brazil, where it's still yet to be discontinued. The Sega pulled a big one on Nintendo and released the Genesis, having another revolutionary game, Sonic. Yet Nintendo held strong and released the SNES, which outsold the Genesis, but Sega for a brief moment had most of the market share, and then we move our way to a big decision by Nintendo. Now, a lot of people blame Nintendo for this, but it's not their fault. It's not their fault. So Nintendo wanted to create a CD add-on for the SNES called the PlayStation. Then Nintendo canceled a contract with Sony because Sony was taking too much power from Nintendo in this contract. And it was very one-sided. After that, Sony created their console to compete with Nintendo, the PS1. It became the first console to ever pass 100 million units sold. Then, in the meantime, Nintendo created the Virtual Boy, which flopped very bad. Then came the N64, and even though it had some of the greatest games ever, it was outsold a lot by the PS2 because the cartridges couldn't have as much storage and were um, more expensive to produce. And alongside the PS1, Sega released the Saturn, which flopped because they released it and too early, and nobody would make games for it, and stores wouldn't sell it. Then after they made their last home console, the Sega Dreamcast, which also flopped. 2 years later, Sony released the PS2, which became the highest selling console of all time. It had a lifespan of 13 years, and Microsoft wanted to enter the screen with the Xbox, which outsold the GameCube, but there was a massive profit loss for at Microsoft. Alongside Nintendo launched the GameCube, which nobody could develop for because it had a tiny disc. And 4 years later, Microsoft created one of the most iconic consoles of all time, the Xbox 360. It had home to legendary games like Call of Duty's Modern Warfare series, Gears of War, Halo 3, but in the end they were slightly outsold by the PS3. Then, the next generation, Microsoft screwed up their marketing so bad that Sony easily won there with the PS4, which introduced Spider Man and other iconic series. A year before that, Nintendo tried to release the Wii U but screwed up their marketing more than Microsoft, which only sold about 11 million units. And come 2017, Nintendo released the Switch, which became the second highest selling home video game console ever, and and Legendary series brought over like from handheld like Pokemon. In 2020, Microsoft released the Series X and S, and Sony released the PS5, which is became really rare because of the chip shortage and scalpers, and the Xbox Series S and X failed and only sold together about 24 million units. And as of 2025, Nintendo just released the Switch 2 last month, and Microsoft is releasing a new handheld this holiday called the Xbox Ally. Well, that's it. That's a brief rundown of the entire history of consoles. Bye.